Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of our high academic recruiting webinar series. Tonight, we're going to talk about getting your right exposure in 2022 with our team here at Head First and then our friends at Diamond College Advisory Team. As we jump into the webinar, let's take a quick look at the agenda of the different bullets and buckets of things that we'll be talking about over the course of the evening. So first, we'll do some quick introductions just to orient you to who you are hearing from. We'll talk about the different types of exposure, and then we'll really dive deep on video and how to use video effectively in your coach communication and in your recruiting process. We'll talk a little bit about how high academic exposure is different and kind of targeting that efficient exposure for student athletes who are looking at competitive admission schools. And then at the back of the evening, we'll transition into a live Q&A to get all everybody's questions answered in real time. So first, let's touch on some introductions. Bonnie, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much. Again, thank you to everyone who's able to join us tonight or when you might be hearing us on this recorded version. My name is Bonnie Pettis, and I'm the softball director with Diamond College Advisory Team. And we'll get into a little bit more of what exactly we do and what that means. My experience in the softball space started out in the Ivy Leagues. I was a pitcher and center fielder at Yale University, and that led me into my coaching career with a few stops at places like the University of Connecticut and University of Southern Colorado in Pueblo, now called CSU Pueblo, and Furman University. So I dipped my feet into many realms, the large state institutions, a smaller state institution with a lot of first-generation students, and then into a small liberal arts setting back on the East Coast. Some of the other fun things that I got to do with my softball career was I got to travel and coach with other teams, other international teams around the world. And I was the pitching coach for the Dutch national team a couple of times, as well as the British national team, and had a lot of fun with that and got to go to some great places. And that is my experience in the softball world. So as a player, a coach, and a assistant coach, I've been in the game a long time, 25 or 30 years. And it's my pleasure to get to share my information with you folks who are going through this process for the first time with everything that you're contending with and on pins and needles about landing in the right place. You will get there, and we're going to share our knowledge with you to help you along the way.
Awesome. Thank you, Bonnie. And as always, thank you for sharing that depth of experience and expertise on both sides of the recruiting desk, as we generally say, with us this evening. Always a pleasure. And my name is Max McKenna. I am our senior manager of marketing here for Head First Honor Roll camps. Once upon a time, I played my college baseball up in Massachusetts at Amherst College, graduated there in 2011, went into teaching and coaching at the high school level for a handful of years, first at Phillips Andover up in Massachusetts, and then a small, mostly boarding school outside New York City called the Masters School. I came back to Head First full-time just over 8 years ago, and really since then I've been working very closely with this division, with our showcase division in particular, to get players the right recruiting opportunities at our events, and also really crucially the right recruiting information as they navigate the recruiting process, and some of the stuff that I feel like I could have used a bit more information on as I was going through the process myself as well. Now, with those introductions out of the way, actually, sorry, one more. Bonnie, as you mentioned, could you give a quick take on DCAT, Diamond College Advisory Team, and what it is that you all do there and you're working with student athletes?
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me the chance to do that. So with Diamond College Advisory Team, this is my 6th or 7th summer with the organization, and I work strictly with softball players like you or like your daughters who are looking to pursue their college career, specifically in the high academic space. And with the opportunity to be at the Head First showcases, I evaluate on average about 750 high school softball players each year. And that gives me a really good basis to be able to say to a student, with this skill set, with the academic interests and capabilities that you have, I believe you may be projected at XYZ. And so when I work with families individually, I help them sort of demystify this process that you hear a lot about from other folks, or you don't know what exactly it means in the high academic space. We work closely with students and families to identify your unique interests and characteristics and help you build out the college list, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, or have talked out some. And with that, I am the guidepost through this process, and it's customized to each person because each student is different. Each student's needs, their talents, their interests. Do they want to be in a city, or do they want to be close to a city but suburban is okay? Do they want to be an hour away from home, or all the way to the other side of the country? So with this, it's really the opportunity to help students and families take their softball talents and use that to gain entry into the best university possible at places that are already very difficult to reach from the get-go. But it's a great process that I love, to get to meet some great families and see them travel through this recruiting process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bonnie. And with that, now we can dive into the meat of the evening, and we're going to start with the different types of exposure. When we think about the different types of exposure in the recruiting process, we generally think in these 4 buckets that we see. And they work kind of, when we think about them, we think about a bit of a funnel, right? We have digital casts a really broad net. Travel ball and tournaments also tend to cast a pretty broad net. Individual showcases, you start narrowing down a little bit. And then there's these school-specific prospect camps that really zone in on your target schools and programs. So first, let's talk a little bit about digital. And when we say digital, a lot of this is driven by video, but it's also things like building out your recruiting landing page on NCSA or Sports Recruits or whatever it is that you might be using. And this is really a great way to introduce yourself to coaches, and also to maintain dialogue, build a relationship digitally, and follow up with targeted programs before and after some of these other key kind of linchpin events that you'll have. Video can, and we'll talk about video in much more detail later on this evening, but video can really play different roles depending on where you are in the process, as kind of a, hey coach, here's your first introduction to me, here's what I look like on video, or an excuse to follow up with a coach, or an excuse to update a coach later on in the process, just as you build that relationship with them. So this can serve a wide range of purposes. I think about it as a landing place for you as a student athlete to keep all of your stuff. You keep your up-to-date transcript and test scores, you keep your up-to-date video, you keep all that stuff in one place so that you can proactively send it out to college coaches. There is, in some of these platforms, a kind of coach discovery engine where they can search for student athletes directly in NCSA or directly in Sports Recruits. And sometimes kids can get found that way, but to me, that's a little bit passive. And so when we talk about digital, what we really mean, and what I really mean, is having a living space for all of your materials that you are then using to proactively send out to coaches via email, rather than just letting them hopefully find you on the internet. The next kind of format for exposure that we think about is travel ball and tournaments. And these can be really great softball experiences, but they generally aren't kind of differentiated in the recruiting exposure that they offer. Continued development is a really key piece of the recruiting process, but it's kind of a different step from getting the necessary exposure. So by all means, yes, play on some great travel ball programs, and I know there's some excellent travel ball programs around the country. Play in tournaments like the Sparkler. Those are awesome. They can get some really good development for you and some really good competition. But what we found is that generally when it comes to relying on them for specifically recruiting exposure, they don't necessarily serve the same purpose for high academic student athletes in particular, because they tend to be large format. The school list is made up of, it tends to be more regionally driven, of schools that are in the area. It's not necessarily targeted or efficient for high academic student athletes who are looking at some competitive admissions schools. The other thing is, even if you are looking at some of these tournaments that are a little bit more targeted and have an academic games or something like that, for a lot of those, if it's still a tournament, it's offering usually only gameplay, which is a really, really important piece of player assessment. It's arguably the most important piece as coaches make a decision about who can play in their program, but it doesn't always give coaches all of the tools or metrics or information that they need to make a full assessment. It's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not necessarily the entire thing. The other thing is, especially with some of these great large format, really competitive tournaments, they tend to be spread across multiple facilities that are not necessarily right next to each other because they just have so many teams that are traveling in. And so there's no guarantee that the coach you need to see or that you really want to see you play is on the right field at the right time to see you. And one of my former colleagues, she had this experience where playing at Pennsbury, which is a great tournament, the organizers of it are really thoughtful. They put together some really great stuff. Her target coach happened to watch one at bat when she was playing for a travel team, and during that one at bat, she struck out on 3 pitches. And so, if you have that one shot in a tournament, it's not necessarily the same as repeat multi-context exposure. Bonnie, when you think about working with student athletes that you work with in the recruiting process, what do you kind of advocate as the role for travel ball and tournaments in kind of the high academic recruiting process and what it can deliver on that front?
Okay, are you hearing me? Hang on, there we go. Still hearing me, Max?
Yeah, we can hear you if you just tilt the camera up a little bit.
Gotcha. Oh, no. Okay, I'm on 2 pieces. This is okay. This is good. It's on my phone and on my other one. We're good. We're working. We're cooking with gas. Thank you for your patience, everybody. So the role of travel ball is a necessity, and I think it's a place where a lot of student athletes are. They have a good and a bad, or they have great pieces of it, and they have certain frustrations. The main piece that travel ball should be undertaking and should be the benefit for you as a student athlete is it should be giving you a place to improve as a student, improve your skills as an athlete, play at the highest level of competition possible. And in that same framework, I think you're also a consumer, right? As well as it's a little bit of, well, I need to be on a team so my coaches can see me, but you're also a consumer and your parents are consumers, which means you want to be in a program that is ethically driven, character driven, led by people that you trust and that you feel good about your children spending time with these people. It's also because we know it's an investment. It's a big investment of time. And really, again, that emphasis should be in a group where you as a player can grow your skills because you want to get stronger. You want to be a better second base person. You want to be able to play second and short and outfield. And you want to have the opportunity to be on the team where you can play those positions. It's great to be on, ABC All-Stars, the best top 10 ranked team in the country. But if you don't ever get to play or you don't play your primary position, that's not a helpful situation. I have certainly had student athletes be told directly by their coaches of choice, the schools of choice, please be sure that the team that you're playing with, that you're going to get to play your primary position, or hopefully when we show up that you can play your primary position if there's a choice in there. And again, we realize that students may change travel ball teams from time to time for a variety of reasons, or sometimes they just disband or implode, or you need a different environment. And what I would want to say to that is don't worry how it may look if you're on different teams. Coaches are going to do their research behind that, and if you have a valid explanation, they're going to take you for your word and understand that the travel ball scenario, if you have a smooth time from 14 on up, that's great, but it's unusual that there are people who would move from different place to place. And from that, I'm gonna let you take to the next step, Max, in terms of showcases.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually reminds me of a question that came in earlier today that I'm going to save for the Q&A about kind of the role of travel ball and in development versus recruiting and kind of how to make some of those really important choices. The next kind of stage when we think about recruiting, the next context is individual showcases. And this is where, you take yourself out of the context of your travel team and whoop, we drop you in an individual showcase. It's just you there. It's not in the context of a team in the same way as a tournament. Has live gameplay. At a showcase like Edinburgh, certainly has live gameplay, but that's a piece of the puzzle, and you're there showcasing as an individual. Because this is targeted towards the individual, this really gives student athletes the ability and the opportunity to personalize the exposure that they're getting, especially in terms of the schools that they are getting exposure to, right? It allows you to be more targeted and more efficient, especially for high academic student athletes who are looking at a certain kind of subset of schools, right? You go to a tournament, there might be a massive list that's regionally driven where it has every school that you ever heard of, that, or maybe some that you haven't, in the Pacific Northwest. And that's great. But if you're looking at schools outside of the Pacific Northwest, you're looking at schools that are in California, Seattle, and also Massachusetts, because they have the specific major you like, they have the academic profile that you're looking for, then you need a different kind of efficiency. You don't need regionally driven efficiency, which can be important for a lot of players. You need kind of this academically driven efficiency. And that's where individual showcases like Head First come into play, is you can really tailor to your specific recruiting needs to be targeted and efficient. So instead of going to that massive tournament where you see a bunch of schools but you're not looking at any of them, you can go to a single event and target a critical mass of schools that you're looking at. And not only that, but schools that are what we call lookalike programs to the schools that are on your list, right? They have qualities in common with the schools that you already know about, even if you might not have heard of their names yet, right? You might show up at camp and you're looking at Bates and Amherst and Williams because you've heard of the NESCAC and you're really excited for it. Then you come to camp and you find out there's a school called Grinnell, which is kind of the same as if you took a NESCAC school and plucked it out of New England and dropped it in Iowa. You'd kind of have Grinnell. Or there's a bunch of schools from the MEAC. You're talking with Coach Gabriel from McAllister, and kind of the same thing, right? Small liberal arts, but it's in Minnesota instead of in New England. So you get to a sense of discovery around all these other schools that might offer the perfect fit for you at the next level as well. Now, the other thing that this does is our focus at camp is on each individual student athlete. And so our focus is on maximizing the reps and exposure for each player rather than a team focus, right? There's no trophy at the end of honor roll. There's no champion, no tournament champion. It's built around the individual student athlete, which means that in addition to that live gameplay, there's multi-context exposure that includes individual showcase reps, a practice that is led by college coaches. There's data-driven metrics around home to first time and home to home and overhand throwing velocity and all these other pieces that really help give coaches a more complete sense of who you are as a player. Yes, I want to know how you play in a game, but I also want to know the mechanics and the metrics and the data that goes into producing those on-field results as a coach, so I can really assess your tools, which is what our showcases are really built to deliver to college coaches too. And then as you work your way even farther down the funnel, there are these school-specific prospect camps. And I would imagine that if you're on this webinar, you've probably gotten some emails from some of these college camps, right? And they offer great opportunities. You go onto campus, you're getting target exposure, usually to the entire coaching staff. You're getting on campus in a softball-specific context, which helps as you learn more about if the school is the right fit. It's a tremendous experience. The thing that we have found is that this is really kind of bottom of the funnel, one of the last steps in the exposure process for most student athletes, because it is just not possible, time-wise, economics, you don't have the time or money to go to 40 or 50 different school-specific prospect camps all over the country. So, but as you work your way down the funnel and you identify these 2, 3, 4 schools that are kind of your final choices or could be the perfect fit for you, that's where these school-specific camps can really come into play, is getting a final take on, are these coaches really interested in me? Do I like this campus? I'm meeting the whole coaching staff. I'm meeting some of the players that are on the team to see if I'm the right cultural fit, personality fit for this program. And you can get a really good sense as you start to really work into the final stages of that decision process. Bonnie, one question that we get a lot that I'll turn to you here is, one thing that's important for these prospect camps is you're going to get probably hundreds, if not thousands, of these invites, right? So when you work with student athletes about which of these camps to attend, what are kind of the the pieces of the decision that play in terms of, are you really interested in that school? Is this coach really interested in expressing genuine interest in you? How do you talk through that with the student athletes who you work with?
Sure. And you're right. There will be endless invitations in the inbox. Please come to our camp. Particularly when you're a Division I schools and the only thing that they can, certainly up until junior year, the only thing they can send you is a camp invitation. So those will be coming. I'm just going to give you like the camp season, and then backtrack into what do you do as a sophomore, what do you do as a junior. As some of you may know, there's that winter camp season, Martin Luther King weekend, or anything before or after Martin Luther King. Everybody and their brother has a camp, and their sister has a camp on Martin Luther King weekend, typically. Then there might be one the next following weekend, and these are all in the cold weather-based areas. They're going to be inside, mostly. Maybe some of them are outside. Some of them, MIT was outside in 30 degrees this year. So, you got to just be ready for it. So you have that winter season. That is important, I think, definitely as a junior. We'll come back to that, but you have that season, mostly January, a little bit of February, and then by the middle of February 20th or so, the camps are going to stop because the colleges are getting ready for their seasons and you are getting ready for yours. And those will be, again, on-campus situations. Then again, once the full swing of full recruiting for everyone, Division I, II, III, comes into play in the summer, there will be more individual camps in that typically July, maybe early August area. Then there'll be another cadre in September, October. So when should you go? And do I have to go to all of them? As we've already said, no, you don't have to go to all of them. You can't. And what might be useful is maybe as a sophomore, picking a city. And if there's any way to combine one or two camps, if you're going to pick Boston, or you're going to pick upstate New York, or you're going to pick Philadelphia, and try to go to one camp and possibly see 2 or 3 other schools at the same time, that's a great way to figure out what's in Philadelphia. Do you like it? What's the difference between the Penn campus and the Haverford campus? And maybe you'll shoot out to Lehigh and Lafayette, 4 really different schools. But you can do them all in, one weekend. So I've had a lot of students who not only were they doing this in January, but they're doing it around February break, President's Week break, whatever it is. Find your way to get out there. And then also students are using their April break in some ways. So that's what I might do in sophomore year, is just take a little taste of Philly, a taste of Boston, a taste of Southern California, whatever the case may be. But as a sophomore, you're just making an early introduction, and you're also doing your own research, your own detective work. That's really what I think the purpose is as a sophomore, because those coaches are still looking, perhaps even in their current, class of 22, maybe. They're highly focused on class of 23. If you're currently a sophomore, class of 24 or class of 25, go if you'd like, but I don't make it the highest priority. Go if you're gonna, it fits to go see your grandmother and grandfather at the same time, or go visit your other sibling who's at a neighboring school. Those things I think are good testers. Junior year, I do think the time when things really start heating up in junior year in most of the schools that we're talking about is that winter time. And Max has already mentioned, okay, you've had a conversation, you've had some phone calls back and forth, and the coaches invited you because they want to see you in their environment. They want to see you interact with their own current players, and you get to see them, how they coach. You get to see the players and ask where they're from and how did they end up at the school. Typically, you also get a tour led by other student athletes, and you just get a little bit more info on what's it like to be a softball player at MIT. What's it like to be a softball player at Lafayette or Swarthmore or Haverford? So those, I think, are valuable, and it gives that coach another data point in junior year as you're heading into the summer, where they still want to see you live. They still want to see you again. So there will be these other places, and some people say, well, I can't get there in the winter time. I live on the other side of the country. Totally understandable. Then another opportunity would be summer after junior year, again in that June, July opportunity, or even possibly into the fall. I mean, there's really no bad time to go. But one thing that I would say about going to any particular camp is the number of times you go can't speed up the process for you. I had a student who was really interested in one place, and they'd been 3 or 4 times. They're about to be their 5th time to go to camp. I said, they know you. They know you. They've seen you at several venues, and I love your enthusiasm, but your enthusiasm can't make this process go any faster because you're in the middle of junior year and you have to finish the school year, and they really can't make any decisions about you for another 6 or 7 months. So maybe just stay home this weekend. And that was hard. It was a little hard for them to take, but they liked it when I explained that the enthusiasm can't make it happen faster. So that it helped them sort of just settle a little bit and say, it's okay. It's okay that I don't go to this one.
Yeah, and I think that that leads into kind of another really important piece of why these prospect camps can be important is also expressing genuine interest to these programs, right? Nothing expresses genuine interest that you are really interested in one program or another, more than showing up on their campus, signing, giving them the registration fee, showing up on campus, making that trip, all of those things. But once you've expressed that genuine interest, that's a really important step, but it doesn't necessarily need to be I'm going to campus every weekend just, to continue to express that interest. If they know you're interested, make sure that they know you're interested. But after that, then you can kind of, you can kind of chill. There's a lot of value to repeat exposure, but getting some space between them also can be important, where player or coaches do want to see you play multiple times because they can start to connect the dots and say, June before sophomore year, she was here. May of sophomore year, she was here. August before her junior year, she was here, and she can start to connect those dots and track your development. But giving a little space and breathing room between those kind of windows, between those opportunities, between those snapshots, can just deliver more and more value for college coaches. Now, Bonnie, one other kind of question that I'd toss over to you is, when you're working with student athletes, how do you think about putting together kind of an exposure plan of attack? I mean, I know that it's really different from player to player, which I know is a really key piece of this, is that it might look very different for Susie than it does for Bonnie, than it does for Sally, given the schools they're targeting, their skill set, their academics, all of that. But when you think about putting together kind of an exposure plan across these 4 contexts, let's say, these different types of exposure, how do you generally work through that with student athletes that are under your care?
Sure. I think that you said the right word right from the beginning, is you have to have a plan. And, at this point with my students, we're looking 3 months out, and then we're looking, in April, we'll start looking at that June, July plan. And it's got to fit with what your summer team is doing, what the opportunities that are presented, which coaches you need to be in front of, and will they be at the tournaments. And again, I think that has to be a solidified plan that's based on, the customized, individualized needs of you as the player. You may want to go to UCLA camp and Oklahoma camp in Florida. You may get invitations, but are those realistic? And if we're going to start, scattering all around, that's something we want to avoid. We want to still be really focused on what are your criteria? What types of schools? What are the right fits? So we've already discussed academic fits. We should already have discussed softball fits and softball reaches. That's where the evaluation piece comes in from me, is to say, these are the types of schools, and you tell me, okay, I'm really interested in, I want a liberal arts school, but I want something more than 2,000. Okay, well, there's not a ton of them. So you're going to go to upstate New York. I'm going to send you to Rochester. You're going to go to upstate New York, one of the most unique Division IIIs with a ton of majors across the board. And you're going to maybe visit Tufts. That's another opportunity. Or you're going to go to NYU, and you're going to get 3 really different ones, but among the biggest. So again, having that plan to say, these are the types of schools that I'm looking at. And we've already identified maybe 1 or 2 others. Okay, maybe we've got to add some of the Ohio schools, the Denisons and the Kenyans of the world. And we're going to tie them with perhaps a travel tournament or any other travel that our family's doing. So we've got to just set these parameters out there. And the one thing I would say about travel is, you may be making some sacrifices in terms of, I've got to get to see this particular coach, or I'm early June and this coach hasn't seen me, and the next opportunity they said is July. you may have to break away from a tournament, one of your travel tournaments, if the timing is what's necessary for you. Because in the end, it's your education, it's your opportunity to pursue your schools. We know already that you're dedicated to your team, and if anybody would give their coach a long enough lead time to say, I know July 17th, I'm gonna need to go to camp at Yale, they will have plenty of time to plan for those type of things. So I think it's, again, having that plan based on what your individual needs are, where you are in the process with each school. Are you multiple touches with this school, or are you just a couple touches in? And then how does that adjust your priority list of where you need to be? And that's a changing thing, really, from month to month as the process funnels down.
I think it's so important, and the idea of FOMO can be really damaging, right? This fear of missing out, where if you don't have a plan and you find out that your teammate is going to this next event or this next tournament or this next showcase or whatever it is, you can start to kind of tighten up and think, oh my God, what am I missing out on by not being there? And then you end up just kind of being carried across the country on the prevailing winds, right? You hear about an event, and so the next week you're at that event, whether or not it's necessarily the perfect fit for you. So I think the key thing about what you said, Bonnie, is like being proactive, building out a plan in advance, but then also really key to what you said is revising it too, right? Like that John Maynard Keynes, where it's like, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, right? Like, as you learn more about schools, as your school list changes, as your projectability changes, as the conversations you're having with college coaches changes, that plan can use some constant updating and revision as well. That doesn't mean that it's subject to any old change and you're just being kind of carried wherever the wind takes you. It's be proactive, have a plan, and then adjust and adapt that plan to make sure that it is still what serves you best. But it needs to make sure that that plan that you're building needs to serve you and the schools that you're looking at. It shouldn't be driven by a teammate or a coach or anything else that may or may not have the same ultimate goals of playing college softball at these types of schools that you have. Next, we're going to talk about using video effectively, which I know there's an appetite for because we've been getting a lot of questions about video on the last webinar and then over email and other avenues over the last few months as well. So we're going to really dive in on this. First, using video effectively. First, the first thing I want to talk about in video content is this first one, right? Crossing out the barriers to entry on creating useful recruiting video clips. In my day, I'm going to date myself a little bit here. In my day, we went to the one guy in town who had the professional camera set up. His son was playing at UConn. He knew all the angles. He had the full cinematography rig. He had it all set up. We went to him, he filmed it, he burned it on DVDs, and I snail mailed it out to college coaches. That world doesn't exist anymore, and I think it's for the better, right? There are so few barriers to entry. It does not need to be a professionally shot on a professional camera by, the Marvel Studios director of photography, right? It does not need to be any of that. This can be shot on a smartphone. If you have a tripod to keep things steady, great. That if you don't, it's a small investment. If you don't want to get one, as long as you have some steady hands, it's totally fine. This is the sort of video content, this showcase style video content that we'll talk about can be captured at your local high school field by a coach, by a teammate, with somebody throwing you BP from. It can be captured very easily. And I want to make sure that we're eliminating those barriers to entry because in 2022, they're just not the same as they were when I went through this process. So I'll say, relative to 2022, I refer to these as low-tech solutions. Now, the fact that everybody has a supercomputer in their pocket is probably not technically low-tech, but it's very accessible at the very least. And we talk about what to include in your initial recruiting video. Ideally, it is a mix of showcase style video and gameplay. The showcase style video, we have a basic kind of outline in a blog post that we've written a while ago that has kind of an outline of what it should include for different positions. It's basically filming some BP from two different angles, from behind home plate, filming out towards the field. And then if you're a righty, you're filming hitting from the left-hand hitter's batter's box, essentially to show your mechanics. Hitting from two angles, show your defensive position from 2 angles, one from in front of you to show your footwork and glove mechanics, and then one from behind you to show the throws you're making, show your arm strength. At its most basic, it can be 5 to 7 reps of that, and that's enough for a lot of coaches to get a sense of it. There's more detail again in that blog post, or there's ways to personalize it and really tailor it to you, which we'll talk about as well. The other piece is game footage. This can be harder to capture because mom and dad, we love the support, but we'd rather not have you inside the fence during games because we prefer you not with the broken jaw. So it can be difficult to capture. And the other thing that can be a little bit wonky about it is coaches don't necessarily know as quickly what they're looking at, right? If they're watching the game footage from some tournament, they don't know the level of competition. They don't know who you're playing. They don't know if it's a 13U team's first time on the field or if it's the best travel team in all of Illinois. So when you do have this game footage, it can be really helpful for coaches to provide a little bit of context for what they're watching, right? If it's the name of the team you're playing or the tournament you're playing at, date in the tournament, date in the team, or something like that, just to kind of give coaches a sense of who it is that you're playing. It's not the be all end all, but it can certainly help to give them that kind of sense of how does this competition stack up? If I've recruited a player off of the team that they're playing against, then I, as a coach, get a pretty clear sense of like, okay, I have a sense at least of where this competition sits. Bonnie, and kind of working to balance the overall video, showcase footage, game footage, what to include, like to highlight each player's individual tools. What do you generally kind of work through with student athletes?
I would say I'm going to back up one piece to say, in my day, it was VHS. I had in my office, I had a stack of VHS. I'd be like, who's going to watch 10 videos today? So, and then they would come home so I could, tape ER, stuff like that. So the days of VHS, we would get them in the mail. Someone put some popcorn in there too at the same time. So nowadays it's so much easier and so much more environmentally friendly to get your video. But what I would say is you want to have an introductory video, like Max already explained, of showing your basic skills. One more nuance to that is put your best skills first, right? If you have blazing speed, then drop a bunt and get to first base, or have a live clip of you beating out a hit, something of that nature. So show your best stuff first. If you're someone who is a power hitter and you crush it and you hit bombs, then show that first, and then probably don't put some running in. You don't need to put that in. Use what are your strengths. Go right to your strengths. You do want to have offense, defense, and a secondary position. All of these schools that we're talking about have limited number of academic spots in terms of who they can support. And so they're looking for anybody that's a 2-for-1 player that legitimately can play 2 positions that they would feel comfortable and they have enough experience. So if you have that, make sure you show that as well. So we're going to have with that general introductory video, a couple minutes. And then what we want to do after that is periodically give these coaches another little visual of you. And that might be, we're coming into high school season. That might be 3 at-bats. Or that is, if you're a pitcher and then you've got an awesome, break your knees changeup, then we want to see 3 times, boom, 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 that you're striking people out, and everybody's running off the field hitting high fives. Like, highlight your strengths, of course. And I would say at this point for juniors, hitting them maybe once a month is good, once every 4 to 6 weeks. And I just always call it giving them max on the brain. They want to see your image, your skills, and hit their brain. It's just how our brains work, is that memory, that recency. So we want to do that. An interesting thing, coaches also, they're going to be able to make their skill assessments in a relatively short number of contacts with you. They're professionals. If I see 750, they probably see 5,000, 3,000 kids. So they have the bandwidth to sort of make some assessments quickly. What this means, though, is they also want to get to know you as a person. And a way to do that is video. We got really, really creative during COVID when nobody was going anywhere. No one was playing softball. And I don't know if, Max, you've got that queued up or you're going to be able to show that at all, but anything that shows you, your family, and personalize it. I'm going to let Max hit this one. And this was a girl who lives in country in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. She's like, Coach, we practice in the hayfield. I said, tape it. Let's go. Let's go. So here we go.
Yeah, and so we don't have the video queued up, but I took this specific screenshot for a couple reasons. One, the name of the video is Labs in the Outfield, which as a coach, I'm clicking on that. And then I see, hello, coach, I'm going to do some hitting practice in my hayfield. I am absolutely going to watch this video. And so to kind of piggyback on Bonnie's point, like, yes, a lot of recruiting videos are going to have some of the same basic blocks, right? Everybody's going to include defensive footage. You're going to include hitting footage. If you're a pitcher, it's going to include pitching footage. But how can you make yours stand out? One of the ways that Bonnie mentioned, which is a really, really key way, is leading with your strengths, right? If you hit bombs, start there. If you're great with the glove, start there. Like, how can you tailor these content blocks to highlight what you bring to the table as a player? And then also, don't be afraid to mix in non-softball, right? If you do gymnastics, great, include a clip of your tumbling routine. If that doesn't show athleticism, I don't know what would. If you can dunk, put that on your video. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a pitcher or an outfielder or a catcher. If you can dunk, that belongs in your recruiting video in any sport. And same thing with, weightlifting, other kind of off-field interests as well.
Yeah, I'm going to just jump in another piece of that. A recent one, I have a student who lives in Upper Vermont. She's closer to Canada than she is to New York City. And she's a pitcher. And her dad doesn't catch down there because the lighting's not really good. She throws into a screen. And recently she made a visit, and the parents said, well, why did you agree to meet with us? You have tons of great recruits and people that you can look at. And said, well, because of where you're from, your high school you're from, because of your transcript that you sent, and your video in the basement. And they just, when I mentioned to them that was really a differentiator, they were kind of like, okay, we'll go along with it. And it made the difference, because honest to goodness, for any young person to be doing their workout, whether it's in the basement or whether it's in your garage or whether it's just in your bow net, it means that you're self-directed and you're self-motivated. And coaches want to see that. They don't always need to see the pretty, perfect, tailored stuff. They need to see the gritty you and what you do consistently.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, the recruiting process is a marketing exercise, right? It's not in that, like, you can leverage your way into a school that you have no business playing at. There's no like tricks or gimmicks, but in terms of grabbing interest and grabbing attention as quickly as you can, that's where some of these tips and tricks can be really useful. Now, they're useful because, as Bonnie said, these coaches want to get to know you. And so they want to see you throwing in your basement. They want to see you hitting BP in a hayfield with your, like, literally the ball returners in this are two black labs. It's amazing. It's like one of the greatest videos on the internet. And yes, it's going to grab the interest of coaches, whether they have dogs or not. So I think that, like, there's that aspect to it as well. It's just grabbing interest and grabbing attention as much as you can in what ultimately is a pretty crowded email inbox. These coaches are getting hundreds, if not thousands, of emails from prospective student athletes who want to play in their programs. And so anything that you can do to give a sense, an authentic view into who you are and raise the interest of the college coaches absolutely can benefit you in the long run as you build your relationship and get on their radars. The other thing about video that we touched on a little bit, but just worth kind of repeating, and we'll talk a little more on in part 3 of the webinar series, is keeping coaches updated has become a really organic and natural way to stay in touch with them, whether or not they're responding to your emails. And one really good excuse to contact is an updated video. If you haven't heard from a coach in a few weeks or a few months, and you're like, I really want to send them an email, there needs to be a purpose behind sending that email. It can be updated transcript, it can be updated test scores, it can be a whole host of things. But if you don't have any of those other academic things, or in addition to those academic things, what you can always do now, because coaches are more used to getting more frequent video updates, now you can film a quick video update and say, hey coach, I last sent you a video in January. I've updated it for the beginning of April. Here's what I've been working on. Let's take a look. And you can kind of give them a sense of just you can get back in their inbox with a really organic excuse. And you can also continue to give them a sense of your development on the field as well. All right, next we're going to dive into targeting high academic exposure in particular, which I know is a really important piece on part one. So there's parts of this that we're going to skim over a little bit more briefly just because we covered them in so much detail. But the first thing to highlight about high academic recruiting exposure, the timeline is different from Power 5 type programs, right? The high academic recruiting process is going to move more slowly at schools like Amherst, Williams, NYU, Harvard, Princeton than it does at Oklahoma, UCLA. They generally speaking need to have a more complete academic transcript, academic file on you before they can say, yep, you're Harvard material, right? And let you in. So the timeline is very different. That being said, and I've gotten a lot of questions from current 8th grade freshmen, sophomores who are in high school and starting this process about the benefits of early exposure. It is still important to get on coaches' radars early so that they can track your development over time, get a sense of getting to know you a little bit more as a person. Just understanding that you need some, if you dive into this process as a freshman, sophomore, or even early in your junior year, it's going to require some patience before you reach the finish line. It's going to be a months or years long process. It's not going to be send a video, see them in a tournament, and commit. That's not going to be the expected time. Just going to set those expectations. Now, we talked a lot about the timing of this in part one. So if you want more detail on the timeline of high academic recruiting, I would certainly advise taking a swing back to look at that one, which would be in the same blog post as this one when we post tomorrow morning as well. The other thing about high academic recruiting exposure is to be efficient, it's really important to target a concentration of your target schools and also lookalike programs, schools that have qualities in common with the schools you're looking at. The same tournaments that Oklahoma can afford to recruit the absolute bejesus out of because they have a huge coaching staff and a massive recruiting budget because they're one of the best softball teams in the country. Guess what? Georgetown, Grinnell, Amherst, Harvard, they don't have that same recruiting budget. And so the same tournaments and opportunities that get you in front of some of those massive Power 5 programs might not deliver the same opportunities or the same quality exposure to the schools that you're targeting. So it's really important to identify where your programs, your target programs are going to be, making sure that you're getting in front of them. And then the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, is the right events can help you discover schools and add to your target list and really multiply opportunities. You show up at camp knowing about 5 schools, and then you learn about 10 more that are the same size, they're in a similar part of the country, they offer some of the same majors, and you think, wow, I got some more research to do. I got to learn more about these 10 schools because they fit all the qualities that I'm looking for in a college experience. And then the other thing about high academic exposure is multi-context, face-to-face engagement. We talked about the multi-context when it came to kind of individual showcases as opposed to large format tournaments. The importance of face-to-face engagement really can't be overstated. It's impossible to replace in high academic recruiting, especially because you can pretty much guarantee that there's a lot of Ivy League, NESCAC, NUMAC, a lot of really great academic schools where their coaches probably aren't going to get fired after a season of going 5-35. But if they recruit kids who are making a mess on campus or getting into all sorts of trouble, that's going to be what's going to cost them their job, right? And so these coaches want to run high integrity programs, and for that, they're looking for the right personality, cultural fit for their locker rooms, for their programs. And face-to-face engagement is just a really important piece of coaches getting a sense of who you are as a student athlete. Yep, they can get to know your grades from your transcript, your test scores. They can get to know who you are as a player by watching you play through a fence. But nothing is going to replace that face-to-face engagement as they get to know you and assess really, are you a holistic fit for the program that I am building? And vice versa, is this coach the personality fit for me as a player that I need to really reach my potential as a player while I'm there in college as well? Bonnie, as you mentioned before, coaches can make an athletic assessment, reassess over the different kind of exposure opportunities, but they're also looking for culture fit, what does that kind of look like from a coaching perspective as they assess, great, she can really hit the ball, but what do I need in my, on my bus?
Sure, sure. Coaches are definitely, they're hitting those three spots, right? Your academic capabilities, your athletic capabilities, and then quote culture fit, meaning how do you blend with the vibe on the team? There's certain coaches that once they make their assessment, they spend a lot of time in that process of getting to know you, sort of doing behavioral interview type questions, situation questions. And they also coaches also really want to know when it comes, further down that recruiting line of, are we your number one choice, your number two choice, sort of the age old adage of, if you get to campus and heaven forbid you have an injury, are you going to stay there because you love Middlebury, or are you going to pack up and go home because really softball was the only thing that was keeping you going? That's very rare in this group of people that we're talking with, like you, students and student athletes. But it's something to sort of throw yourself that hypothetical question. So how do people fit in? In my case, when I was coaching at Furman, we would bring students on campus, prospective students that we really wanted to know more about, and they'd come get to stay overnight. We schedule them to go to classes. Like, yes, you need to see how small the classes are at Furman because you can't hide. You can't not show up for a week because they'll know. And go eat in the dining hall and go see what the dorms are all about and hang with the team because you want to get a sense of, what they're like. And oftentimes it was like, yeah, we love her. She's great. She would be so much fun, da, da, da. Rarely, on the rare occasion, there might be someone who, the most responsible kid on my team, would come and say, Coach, I got to tell you, I think this person's not for us. I said, well, what do you mean? Like, she can hit and she's a good catcher. And yes, but she wanted to find the biggest, baddest party the 2 nights she was here. And we know that if she does that, we're going to all get in trouble, and we don't want that. So again, I use exaggerations, but that's part of, that's just part of life, and that's part of college life. And you as a student, you get to check that out when you go visit a school, and a little more in a softball context, you get to see, how do they act? How much do they take care of school? Or are they the party team that you would not fit in with? Is it the party school you would not fit in with? Is it the, oh my gosh, this is the most boring place on earth that you would not fit in with? Or, oh, it's a long ways from anywhere and I love being in nature. This is exactly what I want. And so it's all of those different ways that coaches are looking for, are you what we're all about, right? Are you fitting with us socially? Because every school kind of has its own feel, whether it's Greek life or not Greek life, or maybe 40% of the student body are athletes. At a lot of these NESCAC schools, that is the case. And okay, maybe you also want to, you might say, oh, I really want I want the football games and basketball, rah. But you might not be fitting at a state level school in terms of as a softball fit. Well, why don't you go look at some of the Patriot League schools that have the same full complement of everything, and yet it's just a little bit smaller context. It just happens on a smaller scale. I should say that's kind of the way. But coaches are looking just to see how folks fit in. And you, as I say, it works both ways. You're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. Is this a place that I would want to be? Are the kids happy? Are the players happy? Do they like the level of intensity that they get in the classroom? Do they like the level of intensity that they're getting in softball? Do they feel balanced that they also get to do stuff as a college student? Do they get to be a college student? And I would say for the vast majority of places you're looking at, those answers are going to be yes, but you need to go find those out for yourself.
I think that's such an important piece that you touch on, because I think so much of this process, when we talk about it, or at least when I hear student athletes and families talk about it, it feels like this is a one-way decision where the coach is saying, are you a fit for me? Are you good enough for me? Do you have the grades for me? But at every step, it has to be a two-way match. So I really appreciate that you said that, because yes, a coach wants to know that you're the right fit for their program, but you also need to know that that program is the right fit for you as a player, as a student, as a total human being, right? And so I think the same way that they're, interrogating you about if you're the right fit, I think you should be doing some of the same things as a player to make sure that it's a two-way match. It's not just, well, this is the biggest brand name school that is recruiting me, therefore I'm going to go there. It's not about that. It's about finding that fit. And so really asking yourself at every step along the way, is this for me? I think is really, really important. We're now going to roll into the Q&A portion of the evening, and I know that we are approaching the promised 8 p.m. start. We're going to go a little bit over with this Q&A, but like I said, we're recording it, and so if at any point you guys have to jump off for plans or anything else like that to finish up dinner or finish up your homework, feel free, and we'll be sending this out. To ask questions, so to send us a question so we can answer. I know a handful of folks have already found it, so we do have some in here. There's a questions tab in the GoToWebinar toolbar. You can type it right in there, press send. I'll be collecting them. There might be some, if it's more kind of a one-off question, I might answer it via chat or, you know, set up some time for tomorrow for me or my colleague Jed to get in touch with you. And we can kind of to chat about it one-on-one. As I'm starting to collect these questions, Bonnie, I know that there's one really interesting thing that you all are doing. And so I'd love for you to just, as I collect them, talk a little bit about this DCAT video eval offer and kind of what's going on there.
Sure. Thank you for allowing this space. Yeah, so as a gesture to you and for you who are here on the webinar, DCAT softball, we're offering a free over-the-phone evaluation, a skills evaluation. If you send your video to me, I will look at it, and then we can set up a time to do detailed evaluation. We'll set up a time to do Zoom because I think we're used to this back and forth with the cameras. I can get it all straightened out, and we'll just talk about skills that I see, where you are in terms of your age, your class, your grade, what some of your interests might be. And this again doesn't have to be fancy. It's really what we talked about before. If you can do it on your iPhone, take it on your iPhone, that's plenty. If it's indoors, great. If you're still practicing indoors, or that's the best place actually you can get the most controlled setting of, you know, hitting off the tee or hitting off a front toss, perfect. Show me some hitting, show me some defense. If you pitch, 2 or 3 reps of each pitch is plenty. And just send it on to me at dcatsoftball@gmail.com, and we will follow up with you and your parents, and we'll set up a time to do this. We did this a little bit earlier from the prior session that we did here, the prior webinar, and we'll be offering this up until April 15th if you get that set up, and we'll set up a time, and I look forward to seeing your video.
Awesome. And thank you for doing that, Bonnie. And I know that it can be one thing, again, that we talked about on part 1 is getting a good third-party, trustworthy, objective assessment is a really key step in the process, but it's also one that can be really difficult. So thank you for doing this for these families. It's definitely incredibly valuable to get experience size in that video. I'm going to leave this up just so we make sure that everybody has a chance to write down Bonnie's email address and everything else like that. And then in a second, I'll turn it to the next page, which has some other resources. Bonnie, one great question came in that I'm going to toss to you is, you talked about kind of these college camps and roughly when they tend to fall in the year, these kind of different waves. When do colleges usually post the dates for their summer camps or where they're going to be that summer? Or kind of how do you think about planning for that summer in advance? Like knowing that, when do you know those dates, and how do you kind of build some of those prospect camps into the calendar for student athletes?
Sure. Well, everything's been a little wonky the last 18 months in terms of what can happen and can't happen and how it changes. But I will say the vast complement of winter camps did happen this past year. I would say probably by sometime April or May 1st, the summer ones will be out. There are not many of them out there now. I keep a running list of them, a massive list, so that work is for my clients. I'm able to provide that, but they're generally around the same time. If you Google Harvard Crimson softball, you will at least land on their page, and you'll find out if they've got their dates posted, or if you look, you know, Harvard Crimson softball 2020, 2019, you can see when they might have had those camps. They tend to fall on a similar week because their facilities are available, or it's when their coaches are home and they're not on the road recruiting. So some of those things kind of mix together. One other thing I would say is there are also camps attached to some of the really big tournaments in Colorado, fireworks, IDT, and then also Zoom into June, they offer these 2-hour blocks that coaches will get together, like MIT and Brown will host a joint one. And those fill up fairly early. So if you're going to one of those tournaments, your team is going, I would look on Triple Crown website for those. And there'll be explanations there how to do that. But you got to just kind of hawk their website or hawk their Twitter and Instagram. That's actually probably the fastest place where you can find things. So you don't have to post anything on social media. Please do not feel like you have to do that, but just follow them. And then you'll see when they're, that's the first place they're going to probably post their info.
I think that's such a good point. The other place that I'd point them, in addition to everything you said, is most schools will have a recruiting questionnaire on their website where you'll enter your grad year and some of your other contact information. At schools you're interested in or mildly interested in, I always generally encourage you to fill those out, because that's what's going to ensure ultimately that when they open up registration, make sure you're on the email list to get those from your target school. So any school that's anywhere near your list, there's no real downside other than a couple emails a year that that'll show up in your inbox. So I would fill out some of those recruiting questionnaires as well.
Absolutely. A quick tag on that is, if you're in the questionnaire database, a few schools have they push out a Google sheet that says, where are you going to be? Because we want you on our list. So if you get that, great. If you don't, it's another initiation, another contact point. Hey, coach, do you have a running document of where you're going to be, or a list of students? I'd love to join that list. Rather than just, generically pushing your schedule at them, flip the script and say, I want to help you. I want to help you with your recruiting. How can I do that? Versus just plastering your stuff at them. So to try to pick their brain a little bit.
The other thing that I want to mention kind of in relation to the school-specific camps is the other interesting thing that they provide is during certain times of the year, during certain times of the NCAA recruiting calendar, these on-campus, what they call institutional camps, are sometimes the only things that coaches can recruit or attend, right? There's kind of this big recruiting window through the summer, and then in the middle of August, I think it's the second or third Monday of August, it stops. And from then on, they can't do things up until certain specific, the 6 weekends leading into Thanksgiving, which we have to struggle with for events. All of our events are on totally compliant weekends, but having to know that NCAA calendar, the fall can be a really important time to get the right exposure to some of your target schools. During the fall, specifically during late August, September, October, a lot of the times that you're going to be able to do that is going to be at institutional camps, because that's the only thing that coaches are allowed to attend and recruit is institutional camps on campus. The other thing is some of these prospect camps are going to have other area schools that attend. Not all of them, maybe even not most of them, but some of them do have some other coaches who attend and recruit their camps. Now, generally speaking, they're not from the same conference, because I think that would be an interesting conflict. If you have a camp at Harvard and Harvard and Brown are fighting over the same pitcher, you usually don't see rivals at the same camps. But one of the ways that I got exposure to the Amherst coaching staff was I went to the Harvard camp. Because it was close enough, it was a camp that existed. The Amherst coach came out and attended the Harvard camp. There were probably 10 or so other coaches in addition to Harvard that were there. And it was a really kind of nice, little bit smaller context, but still had some other opportunities there as well. Bonnie, next question I'm also going to toss straight to you. And this is one that I referenced earlier about kind of the picking the right travel ball opportunity. This one came in earlier today by email. When you're picking a travel ball program, what is kind of the cost benefit analysis or the decision matrix for, big program that has a great name and great brand and plays in some of those really awesome tournaments, plays in the Sparkler, plays in the fireworks, plays in Zoom, versus maybe it's a smaller, play more local games, but I have a chance, I might have a chance to play more, I might have a chance to play my position more. How do you think about balancing that for individual student athletes in terms of playing time, smaller program, like big exposure? Where does that kind of, that break come in?
Yeah, there are oftentimes students are in that position. And then they get to this point of recruiting, like, okay, what do I do? I would say the main considerations would continue to be, are these coaches of character? Whichever side you're going to choose, is this a good situation for you? Where can you get seen by the coaches of your choice? Fantastic. Again, you want to play on any of the top 5 teams out of California. Are the schools of your choice going to be at those games? You can't necessarily control that. So what I would kind of back up a little bit and say is the whole part of the process, or the way that we approach a process with DCAT, is recruiting yourself to the schools of your choice is really going to be the driver for how do you do that. So again, I've got this student up in northern Vermont, and she loves her local team, but they don't leave New England. And so she's going to guest play on some other teams in some other places. She actually made a visit at Amherst, and the Amherst coach was like, yeah, I can help you find another team down here that plays a little bit more, because they would like to see her play in another area. So I think when you're in a more remote location and you're playing a very restricted geographically type of schedule, you're going to have to find ways to fan out. And whether that is, again, Pennsbury or Team New Jersey or New England's Finest or Ohio Stingrays, whatever the tournament is, you're going to have to find ways to hit the most coaches at the most time. And some of those, again, you go to that website and they'll list all the coaches in a 5-hour radius typically attend Pennsbury. Division 2s, 3s, all the NESCACs, they're there. So I think that is usually the difficulty, is being able to have to break away from a smaller team. In the rare case too, though, you may have someone who's on a, quote, high profile team, but if you're not getting any playing time, or the only coaches that show up are Oklahoma, Arizona, and Florida, because your schools of choice just don't go to that field at that time, that's not going to benefit you either. So it's trying to find that happy medium type of place. And I think, as we already mentioned, is directly asking coaches, which tournaments do you typically attend? Which tournaments do your staff, someone from your staff, typically attend, and adjust your calculus based on that.
And I think that two things that I want to kind of highlight of what you just said as well is, like, that development piece is so important. If you're not getting the chance to play in a way that is making you better as a player, then ultimately, no matter what the exposure you get from that program is, it's not going to serve you in the end, because you're not getting better, right? It's there's a lot of kind of like, yes, you need to get exposure, you need to get in front of the right coaches. A really important piece of the recruiting process is just being as good a softball player as you can possibly be. And so continuing to make sure that you're maximizing that ultimately is a piece of the recruiting process. And a kind of related question to this that we get a lot is, when should I showcase? And the answer is when you are ready to be showcased, right? And that's different for each and every student athlete as they go through this. But getting exposure before it's the time for you to get exposure, or getting exposure at the expense of continuing to develop as a player, ultimately doesn't serve you. The other piece of this that Bonnie said that I want to really zoom in on is the freedom to individualize the process, right? Ultimately, your process is going to, if you're targeting these sorts of schools, your process is going to look different than 95 to 97% of your travel ball teammates. That's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. You're going through this process in a really thoughtful way. That's awesome. But it means that your needs in this are going to be a little bit different, or significantly different, from most of your teammates. So you need to be able to personalize the exposure that you're getting, whether that means missing a local weekend tournament because you're going to go sign up as a free agent for Pennsbury, or you might miss a larger tournament to come to head first because you know that it has 30 of your target schools. The freedom and ability to personalize the exposure that you need to get is another really important piece of the puzzle, I think, when thinking about making a travel ball decision as well. If you're in the midst of a change, I think it's perfectly valid to ask a coach, hey coach, I'm looking at these sorts of schools. Because of that, I therefore know that I need to pursue these 2 or 3 opportunities over the course of the summer. Is that okay, right? Like, does that, I know that I might miss some stuff, and I don't want to, but I know that for myself to think about the recruiting process, I might need to miss a game here or there. What do you think of that? And I think that just asking that question, going in with the eyes wide open on both sides of that, can be really valuable to set expectations as well. Those are the questions that have come in. So I think we can feel free to wrap it here. I will say, certainly not the first, last, only chance to get your questions answered. Up here on the screen, you see our email address and phone number, our Twitter and Instagram. Toss us a follow there. This will be posted on our blog, and so you see that URL there as well. Bonnie's email and the DCAT website also on there. Feel free to reach out to any and all of us with questions if and as they come up. One final housekeeping note on the way out. This was the second of 3 parts of our high academic recruiting process. The next one is very excitingly titled The Do's and Don'ts of Recruiting, and that will be on Tuesday, April 19th, also at 7 p.m. Eastern. So you can find that in the same blog post where part 1 is posted, where part 2 will be posted at some point tomorrow. You can also find the registration link for that part 3 as well. We'd love to see you back. And again, in that same post, you can see all those the video recordings and outlines of everything that we're talking about. So on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for attending the webinar, taking some time out of your evening tonight. We know that your time is valuable, especially in March, although maybe some of you are on spring breaks, maybe you don't have homework to go back to, which would be great. We hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining us.